Today, I'm joined by Judith Meyer, who's been a friend of mine for many, many years and is just an inspiration to me, not just for language learning, but also just on what a human being can actually do and achieve in life. Judith, I'm going to embarrass you completely and just say, I mean, I don't actually know if I could even name all of the projects you've been involved in. I'd probably forget something super important, but it's just astounding. Whenever I speak to Judith, there's always like something, and it's never a small thing she's doing. It's always like something super cool and super different and with really interesting people. And she's like done basically a degree's worth of work, if not a doctorate's worth of work, to get to a level where she can do something like in just amazing circles. So I mean, I just find it an absolute source of an endless source of inspiration for me personally. Yeah, so I look up a lot to Judith and all of her achievements, and I'm absolutely honored that she agreed to talk to me again today. I mean, I must get very boring for because all I can do is bore people in lots of different languages. So,
no, but you're really, really impressive, and someone I've always looked up to, even like, I don't know, 10, was it 15 years ago, on the How to Learn Any Language forum. You were already a forum elder, already someone that everyone was asking, oh, what would Richard do? And because I think that for most polyglots, it's really like we learn languages and we forget them again, and we learn languages and we forget them again. But you actually managed to maintain a usable level in so many different languages, and that's, I think, quite unique about you.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, as I say, for me, it's all about you for this hour. So as much as I appreciate the flattery, and I think it's very kind of you to say nice words about me, I do want to focus on you because it's your achievements that I really want to talk about. And a lot of the questions that I get are actually about the way, you know, you've created these guides, right, of how to script hack and publish them as books under the Teach Yourself brand. How on earth did all of that come about?
It's a bit of a long story, but I think quite interesting. So originally I had the idea because I was browsing my parents' Sunday newspaper, and at the back of the newspaper, they always had cryptograms. So there are several ways you can do cryptograms. Either you have just a text where you replace each English letter with a different English letter, but the ones that we had in the Sunday newspaper were always replaced with symbols, or like flags, or sometimes fruit, and another week it would be vegetables. And so each symbol represents one letter in a German phrase, you know, a famous quote or something. Just no language learning involved. But at one particular week, they had Chinese characters. So each German letter was replaced by a Chinese character. And I was like, okay, I understand that people love to do these enigmas and puzzles and figure out what's going on there. But if they actually spend 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out which Chinese character represents which letter in German, and then afterwards that knowledge is for nothing. They cannot do anything with it. It's really sad, isn't it? I mean, if you could like put Georgian letters, for example, if you made this same thing with Georgian letters, because for Chinese it doesn't really make sense, but with Georgian or other lesser learned alphabets, Burmese, it would be a language lover's dream. You do this puzzle, and at the end of doing the puzzle, you know which letter corresponds to which, and it would be so amazing. Now, of course, not everyone likes to do these puzzles. They can be quite extreme, quite tricky to figure out. So I thought I would do something a bit easier on the brain, and I'd actually tell you which letter corresponds to which, and then gradually give you more of these puzzles, starting with ones that have just 2 letters, and then 3 letters, and 4 letters, and just allow you to read these. And there is something the human brain is made for puzzles. It's made to enjoy these. You can see this in little children when they first learn their alphabet. It can be quite annoying for parents. You probably have a few stories like that. You walk around and your kid just wants to read every single thing they see. Like, Mama, this says Ford, and this says kiwi, and it says, and they just read all these things that we have learned to ignore, and all the ads and everything. So it's this kind of joy of seeing something and being able to read it. That's the basis of what I wanted to bring across with these script hacking books, because it's really just learning one letter after the other and doing a lot of this reading, but not the kind of reading that you get in typical textbooks where, usually you get even a whole table worth of, say, Arabic letters, and then immediately afterwards you're supposed to decipher a whole dialogue of Arabic, and you're just miserable spending 10 minutes working on each line. And I wanted to avoid that and give you a brain-friendly way to get into that. And everything that you read in the script hacking books is actually words that you will recognize. Names of famous people, for example, but also international words that you'll use in your target language, like names of fruit, people's names, place names, country names, international sports, like karate and judo and so on. So words that you will actually use, but that are also target language. And that was the idea.
And a brilliant idea it is too. I mean, I used your Korean book when I was learning to write Korean, and I really enjoyed that, at least you're not worrying too much about what you're learning, because as you say, they're known words. It's the actual learning of the letters and what they represent. So I really enjoyed that. Have to ask, have you got any other hacking plans in the future for other scripts?
Well, it depends on my publisher. I have suggested 2 more languages for which it may make sense to do this, but I have to wait for their okay. So if it happens, it will take a while, because I need to sign the contract first and then actually write these books. So not in the near future, at least. Right now would be a good time to get the complete collection of the 7 books that are currently out.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good idea for anyone out there listening. Yeah, there's doing that is definitely worthwhile if you're studying those languages, or if you just want to be able to decipher them. You don't even have to study the full language. It can be quite a lot of fun just to decipher languages, right? Almost like when people
and not just fun, also very useful. For example, I went to Kiev long before the war, like when there was an Esperanto event there. And I didn't really have the space to be studying Ukrainian, but I did learn to read the letters, the alphabet, just to decipher known words. And this was so useful walking around Kiev, especially the non-touristy part. You don't see many Latin letters. You really need the Cyrillic in order to figure out where the buses are going, and what kind of shop this is, and what's on the menu.
Yeah.
In pizzerias especially, you have so many menu items that you can read if you just understand the alphabet, like pizza fungi or bacon and so on. Like there's so many international words that we don't even realize.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we see that in Macedonian too, actually. A number of, if you knew, or if somebody knows the Macedonian script, then you can very quickly start to make sense of a lot of words. But it's exactly that, isn't it? Until you don't know. You've got to have the key to the door, and then once you've got the key, you can see what it unlocks. And yeah, it's a really nice thing. But the interesting thing with you is that you're European, and obviously many European avid language learners, polyglots, focus mainly on sort of certain language groups, or particularly European languages in my case. I mean, I've always been Romance, Germanic, Slavic, and then played with lots of others as well. But you've actually gone quite deep into some of these other languages that you've got these courses for, and particularly some of the Asian languages. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, how is this sort of wide variety of linguistic interest, and how does it work in your life?
Well, I've always been more optimistic than I ought to when learning these non-European languages. I especially regret, well, I don't really regret learning Swahili, but I did plan to go to Africa and it never happened, and my language regressed quite a lot. So that can always happen. It's better if you already have a plan, but I do enjoy learning all these languages from different language families and just seeing how they work. Originally, I thought it would be useful because my profession is a computational linguist, so I have to create a lot of algorithms that can deal with languages, and then it's very useful if your system is able to accommodate very different grammars. So you don't rely on cases being a particular way, you don't rely on word order being a particular way, you don't rely on having or not having this feature, you accommodate different features, and it's just fascinating the kind of features that you see in different language groups. Like in Swahili, they have this completely different tense, which they use when you start talking about the past, and the next thing that you say, like in English, a sentence would probably start with the words "and then." So like I went to the movies and then this and this and this happened. For the and then you have a different tense in Swahili. And this is just crazy. Also, they include they include relative clauses all in one word. It's very fun. But actually in Asia, most of the languages are quite easy, at least to learn them at the basic level. They're really quite easy. Like in Chinese, in Indonesian, you don't need you don't need to learn conjugations or irregular verb. It's all just I go today, I go yesterday, I go tomorrow. It's really quite easy. And the real difficulty with Asian languages is that you need to keep learning even at the advanced level. What I mean is, when you're learning European languages, there comes a level, especially when you start to read newspapers and talk about politics and things like that, or science, there comes a level where almost all the vocabulary is common, and the sayings are common. The cultural basis is the same. So you have for example, in German, you have the expression Gang nach Canossa, which refers to the German emperor who had to go to Canossa to beg forgiveness from the Pope. And it gets used by journalists talking about politicians having to do a backflip. And so the same expression exists in Italian. I think there's something similar in English, though I can't currently remember what it is. In French, in Spanish, probably. In Polish. So when you get to this high level where this kind of expression would be used, then you suddenly have common access, or also the vocabulary that comes from Latin, and which is much more common at the higher level, especially in English. You have all these higher level words that come from Latin. You have them in other European languages. So there is this common basis, and this does not happen when you're learning Chinese. Okay, my Chinese is a bit rusty now, but I did have C1 level at it in one point. I wrote a thesis in linguistics in Chinese, for those who want to find it on Scribd. So it's at this level, you keep learning new expressions and new words. Obviously, they don't have any Latin loan words, but also they have all these references to historic events that you've never heard of. They have references to literature that you never read. Here in European languages, you have, for example, the expression much ado about nothing, which I believe comes from Shakespeare, and it exists similar, or 5 to midnight, something like that, from Shakespeare, from the Bible, and so on. And in Asia, you get all these references to Confucius and to various local writers. So at that level, you just have to keep studying. And I think that's the main difference. Asian languages can be, most of them are quite easy to learn at the beginning level, because there's usually, I mean, there are some exceptions, but most Asian languages don't have much in terms of conjugation or cases. But at the advanced level, you may go through more of a slog than you're used to.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine, you know, when you get into those languages more. I definitely haven't studied Chinese to a C1 level like you, but I can definitely imagine what you're saying. And yeah, it sounds very plausible indeed. So you mentioned Chinese, and you mentioned, you know, sort of Swahili. Which other languages have you really been have you sort of done a bit of a dive into, whether it's sort of a lower level or the higher levels, outside of the European, sort of Indo-European languages?
Well, Chinese is really my best non-European language. Apart from that, the one that I used to be best at is, well, Swahili, Hebrew. Hebrew was even better than Swahili because I had a friend that I was talking to a lot, but now he moved away, so it's also gone out of use a bit. Indonesian, you know, the Indonesian embassy here in Berlin offers free language classes. At least they did before the pandemic. And I think they may do that in other cities. So if you want to learn Indonesian, just look for the embassy. They may have a program. They also have a library of Indonesian books. It's really cool. Yeah, Indonesian, Hebrew, Arabic. Well, Arabic more on a basic level. I've done some Vietnamese, but I stopped pretty quickly. Japanese, obviously for the Polyglot conference. I like to dabble in all these languages and see what they're about.
Yeah, I mean, it is impressive to sort of hear the languages you studied. And a question that came in actually from Susanna was, and this is actually really quite pertinent. A lot, I'm imagining people listening to this now thinking, how on earth do you do this, Judith? I mean, how do you manage to balance your work, all the meetings you have, the traveling and engagements that you have just generally in life with the language learning? How do you do all of that?
Well, mostly I don't. I'm not like you. I mean, I keep forgetting my languages and then reactivating them when I need to. So it's just something I've learned to deal with. Of course, I try to make time for languages. Usually I wind up studying about 1.5 to 2 hours a day. But that's not necessarily like hard study. Some of it is Anki, obviously, but also like reading books. I love to read books or read the news in different languages, and that doesn't feel so much like study. It's just diving into this foreign culture, which can be quite fascinating. And I think if you have a passion for it, it can feel very good, and the time can pass very quickly. One thing, of course, that I try to do is I work for this international organization and DM25. And even though the working language in the team is English, I have also reached out to the equivalent team in Greece. So whenever we meet, we always talk Greek. I try to write all my emails to them in Greek. And the same for them. And I try to convince them that I'm needed over there, so they give me a free trip to Greece to talk to them in person. Or just now, by the end of the month, I will be visiting 2 of my colleagues who are in Montenegro. And I plan to do a week immersion in Montenegrin, which is basically the same as Croatian and Serbian. So well, you know that they're not really language schools that you can go to in these countries for foreigners to learn Montenegrin, but you can do a lot by yourself, just organizing to be around people that are ready to speak the language with you, or booking a few excursions. Tour guides are always happy to babble away in their native language and tell you all about the history and the cultural activities and traditions in their region.
Oh, that sounds like a wonderful opportunity. And getting to go to Greece as well. Wow. I mean,
Yeah,
really, really nice. It's a
Greece
nice
is
thing to be able to
so
do with
beautiful.
language. Yeah, it's lovely. There was another question actually, just to sort of go back slightly on what we were talking about, the script hacking books that you developed. So Susanna was interested in knowing which of the scripts was actually the most challenging for you.
For me, probably Arabic, simply because you don't get the vowels, and if you don't have the vowels, then it's super hard to read anything. And that's actually the one language that I've learned several times to about the level where you drop the textbooks and you start just reading stuff. And I've never managed to make the switch. I always drop out at that level because I don't understand books. I think that the situation has improved now with more easy readers being available for learners. But last time I tried to learn Arabic, well, I learned standard Arabic and tried to switch to books, and it was just not feasible. And I learned Egyptian Arabic and had some nice conversations, but again, there are not really that many written materials in Egyptian Arabic. So then you also can't switch. You would have to switch to, I don't know, TV series. But okay, that's a handicap that I have in learning, is that I'm really not into watching a lot of stuff, like watching TV series, because it didn't feature in my life. Growing up, my parents controlled our TV use very strictly. My brother and me got like 2 hours of TV a week. So like that's like one movie with which we would watch with parents, because the TV was in their bedroom. And so the rest of the time we just didn't have TV. We were just reading books or playing outside. Or on the computer, obviously. I was into computer games a lot, but this means that now, even when I want to watch TV or to get really sucked into a Netflix series, I just can't do it because I'm on this rhythm of watching something like once a week or so.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I
Well,
mean,
for language learning, I do wish I could. I mean, sometimes I've managed to get addicted into a series, and actually, that was key for my Chinese. I got sucked into this series called Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is one of the classics, the 4 classics of Chinese literature. But I didn't reach the actual book, just the TV series that they made in 1995. It's a long TV series, 84 episodes. And when I watched this all, they had produced another TV series about the same topic, which were also 84 episodes or so, which I also watched. And the first one had English subtitles and the second one didn't. So I got really good at reading Chinese subtitles. And then I didn't understand something that happened in one of the episodes. And I was really confused by it. So I tried to Google it. To see what other people are saying about this episode and what might have been happening then. And that was the day, I remember it very clearly, even now. It was the day that I learned to skim Chinese texts. So you have like a forum discussion with, I don't know, 20 people on the first page writing something, and you just have to figure out which of these people is saying something about this episode that I'm interested in.
Wow, that's no mean feat at all. Absolutely.
Needing to learn, having this feeling that you need to know something is just a super big motivator.
Yeah, I think that is a big motivation, isn't it? When you know the why. Why am I doing this? Okay, I'm doing it because I want to get this thing. I want to achieve something. Amanda said, you mentioned reactivating your languages. Do you have any tips for reactivating previously learned languages?
Well, I think the standard way to do is to review the materials that you used, the Anki decks that you created for yourself, if you did, the textbooks that you used, your written notes, because that means you're re-engaging with things that you already know, with vocabulary that you used to know, with dialogues that you might half remember. That is, I think, the obvious way to do it, but also your motivation may have changed. For example, at one point I learned just enough Japanese to get the gist of a TV series that I was interested in, and later, much later, I wanted to learn some Japanese in order to get by in Japan for the Polyglot conference, and obviously re-engaging with that TV series material was not the best way to do that. So instead I just use the normal course and italki regimen to get my speaking ability up to par. And that's fine too, because you keep saying the same things. It's not that the language is completely different. I've also found this for other languages, that sometimes it makes sense to just use different materials. Say, to use teach yourself Croatian next to teach yourself Serbian next to colloquial Serbian, just to get the same vocabulary, the same grammar, explained in different ways, used in different sentences. It all reinforces itself. Yeah,
it's interesting you say that, because you know, using the same sort of types of books at the same levels, I have heard people say, obviously, that they feel they can't choose, and they feel like they're going backwards and forwards between one to the other. How would you address those kinds of issues? I mean, of staying motivated to move on, to feel like you're moving further on with the course?
Yeah, I get that it's difficult, and I have this motivation issue too. Generally, after around 3 months tops, I want to do something different, or I get frustrated if I can't do anything. So my recipe for this has been to do these 3 months challenges. To even sometimes, obviously, the like the Fluent in 3 months challenge, or the 6-week challenge, the Tadoku challenge, these online challenges that exist, or sometimes just for myself to say, okay, I'm going to spend 3 months now improving my Russian, and this is just for me. I'm going to aim to have conversations with Ukrainian refugees here in Berlin, and that's my challenge to me, and that is my goal. And I found that if you really reduce the scope of what you're trying to learn, you're not trying to learn the whole language in 3 months, you're trying to learn conversational Russian, for example. You're not going to spend much time reading or writing or even getting good at grammar, but just learning basic conversation. Or in the case of that Japanese theory series, I said, okay, I'm going to spend just 1 or 2 months trying to improve my Japanese listening comprehension, just listening comprehension, which means no talking, no reading, no writing. I wasn't studying any of the characters. I was not learning any vocabulary that doesn't come up in this series. So it's not possible. I don't believe in these magic recipes that you can master a language in 24 hours or even 90 days. The only thing that you can do is to get good at something really small, like a comparatively small area of the language. If you put in like 40 or 60 hours over a course of like 3 months, then you're probably pretty good at this one task that you set yourself, like reading the news could be one such task. And then you have something to go on. This was always not a reason for me to stop, but to continue in a different direction. Say, okay, I spent 3 months on Indonesian, I can read the news now. I'm going to keep reading the news in Indonesian. And meanwhile, I'm going to try and understand this book, or I'm going to try and have basic conversations. Or in Japanese, I just managed to have conversations. Now I'm going to, I don't know, branch out to reading this blogger. So it's after 3 months, I have these check-ins where I compare what I'm able to do with what I set out to do, and what I set out to do is always something comparatively small. It's not the whole language, and then I hopefully have one ability that I didn't have before, like understanding this particular type of text or understanding this particular kind of TV series. And I use that ability. I keep using it. If I don't feel like keep studying the language, I just keep on the same level. I keep doing the same thing that I used to do. And when I'm motivated again, then I branch out to some other ability.
Yeah, it sounds very sensible. I mean, breaking things up and giving yourself sensible and realistic goals, things that you can look back on quite relatively quickly and say, okay, I've achieved that, or I haven't achieved that. What else do I need to do, or can I move on? Sounds like a very sensible solution to me. There's a question in from Corinna, who shares your surname, and Corinna asks, you know, what do you do to keep languages separate? Corinna's been finding it difficult to keep languages separate, and wants to know if you've had experience with that, with similar, you know, whether it's similar languages, whether it's languages that for some reason you feel get mixed up in your head. Have you got any experience of that, and do you have any tips on how to deal with it?
Well, I think that Richard would be much better to answer this, because I have always failed to keep languages apart. Like my Italian and Spanish are a disaster, and my solution has been to learn non-European languages, which are generally very far apart from each other. I mean, we don't even realize it so much as Europeans, but for example, Thai and Vietnamese are not related. Chinese is yet different. Hindi is yet different. Korean is not related. So it's very easy to keep languages apart when they're not actually related, and it's one way that that I deal with it. And the other is, of course, to try to reach a good level before starting the next language. So I was very careful not to learn any Russian until I felt that my Croatian was on a decent enough level that I wouldn't immediately confuse everything. But yeah, that's the only tips I have. I actually heard a talk by Richard on this topic, something to do with anchor languages and so on. Do you maybe want to explain that?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I'll be brief because I really want to hear more from you during this hour. But the idea of anchor languages is that you build up, as you rightly said, a given language or maybe a couple of languages to a high level, and they become your anchor languages, languages that you feel very, very comfortable in. And it doesn't really matter what happens, they're always there because they're kind of anchored into your brain. And then from those anchor languages, you, as you were saying at the beginning, you've got a number of similarities, particularly within linguistic families. And you can then use those anchors as a starting point to grow out to other languages that are related, and they become just languages that you may vary in ability from time to time, but you still have your anchor languages to kind of to keep things set and hooked and attached to something like a bedrock of knowledge. And that's kind of how I see the anchor languages, and that does help for me. It is interesting because obviously you'd not done, I don't think when we first met, you'd not really studied any Slavic languages. So it's interesting hearing you talking in those terms about Croatian and Russian. Starting Croatian and wanted to get good before feeling you wanted to do some Russian. How has that been? How has the experience been?
Well, actually, at one point, the first Slavic language that I tried to, no, actually, okay, I have a complicated history with Slavic languages. At one point, when I was, I think, 14, there were Russian visitors to my little city, and I learned just a few sentences to use with them, and I still know how to say I'm 14 years old in Russian, which is super useful now, as you can imagine. Yeah, I didn't actually learn the language at that point. And then some years later, I was invited to the Czech Republic, and I learned a bit of Czech, but I found it so difficult, and I was not, I guess that's another reason for me to start on Asian languages, because I really find it hard to deal with cases and all these changes to words and the irregular verbs. And I don't know, I'm not this kind of grammar nerd. And then I tried Russian for like 3 days and decided, nope, that's not for me. and yeah, so a lot of years later, many years later, I wound up working for DiEM25 and having several colleagues from ex-Yugoslavia. And I decided, okay, I'm going to try Serbo-Croatian and try this language, which I found is actually quite a lot easier than Russian. Not just because of the alphabet. Okay, the alphabet. Okay, maybe I need to dispel a prejudice. A lot of people think that they shouldn't learn a foreign language because of the alphabet. Actually, the alphabet, the Cyrillic alphabet, you can master it in like 4 hours or something. So that's not the reason. The problem with Russian is that the spelling is about as regular as English spelling, or maybe French, but it's really not out there as one of the phonetic languages. So even if you learn Serbian, which is written in Cyrillic letters, you're going to be much better off than learning Russian. And I don't know, the grammar also seems quite a lot simpler to me. Obviously, now that I've learned a lot of this grammar for Croatian, I can also see it in Russian. A lot of the case changes are the same, or at least similar. So it carries over, and it makes it easier now to learn Russian. I think it was the right decision for me, because Serbo-Croatian is really is good for a beginner Slavic language, and it's spoken in quite a large region. Of course, if you have friends, that helps even more. And then learning Russian is not nearly as difficult as it used to be. It really felt impossible the first 2 times that I tried, and now it feels definitely manageable.
You know, it's interesting hearing you talking about, in the beginning, you mentioned not getting scared by cases, right? And some people will be listening to you who maybe know more about you. First of all, you speak German as your first language, which has 4 cases, which for people with no cases is like, oh my word, it's German, it's got 4 cases. But not only that, you teach Latin. So there's kind of a bit of a dissonance going on in my head here when I hear you say I don't like cases or grammar, because I think one of the first times I met you in person, and went in Berlin, actually, it wasn't in first time in person, but in Berlin, first time I went to Berlin, we spent time together. You talked to me for a long time about, you know, Latin that you were studying or teaching to people, and how you did it and how wonderful this course was. And so hearing you now say, and this just blew my mind, that you said you were scared of cases. It's just, you've absolutely fried my brain with that statement. I need you to explain that to me in the context of what I've just disclosed.
Well, can't blame me for German, because it's my native language, and obviously I managed in grammar classes identifying the subject and the object of the sentence, but it doesn't imply actually having to deal with cases myself. And when I was teaching at German Part 101, I always told people, if you're A1, if you're A2, don't worry about the cases. People will understand you, and that's the most important thing. At that point, A1, A2, you're much more likely to get your conjugation wrong, and that is going to be much bigger obstacle, or just not having the vocabulary is going to be a much bigger obstacle to communicating with people compared to making mistakes with your cases. So that's also the philosophy that I adopted for myself, for Russian, by the way. I didn't actually make much of an effort to learn the cases, except where they were the same as in Croatian, or very similar. Like in one case, like the Croatian uses ima, and in Russian it's ami. So it's okay, I can manage that much, but yeah. Latin is a completely different beast, because at least the way I was taught, I learned I learned Latin at German high school, and our focus was really just on understanding classical texts and medieval texts written in Latin. We didn't have to do any conversation. We didn't have to write any text by ourselves. So it was really just noticing that there is this ibus ending on some of these words, and means it's dative or ablative plural, which means we're going to translate it this way. And you have a lot of time, because it's not spoken language. You don't have to catch this ibus while someone is speaking rapid fire Latin at you. You see it, and you translate it at a very slow pace. So learning Latin is really not comparable to learning modern languages, at least if it's taught that way, which I believe is the right way to teach Latin. I mean, okay, there are a few people who want to write poems in Latin for their fantasy world or something, but most people I know, they just want to get access to the culture, to the original Latin poetry, to original texts about historic events and so on. There's some fascinating stuff written in Latin, and I really enjoy learning it. But learning the cases is much more manageable if you just have to recognize them and not use them yourself, and especially not in speech.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I'm going to skip one question that I have because I got this. The last question that came in is just about Latin as well. So I think it ties in quite nicely to what you're just discussing, and also answers probably questions that other people may have. Says Judith, this is from Theodore, or Theodore. Do you know how you pronounce names goes out of my head? This is the one thing that goes straight away. I I see names in different languages now that have a sort of an equivalent, and I never know how to pronounce names anymore. So please do excuse me if I butchered your name. I'm going to call you Theodore because that would be true to the language I'm speaking right now. Judith, what methods do you use to teach Latin is the question. Have you used Lingua Latina per se illustrata by Hans Oeberg? And he comments that this is such a good way to learn grammar usage in a natural way, cases and conjugations.
Oh, I agree that this book is really great, and I would love to have it for more languages. Of course, it's not possible to teach every language like this, but yeah, it's a great book. When I teach, I generally use a different method, which is more based on explicit teaching of vocabulary and grammar. But what I've done is I've condensed what you really need to learn into 25 lessons. I mean, what you really need to learn in order to read classical Latin authors in the original, like Caesar, Cicero, and so on, because I think that's what most people want to do, right? For them, the motivation of learning Latin is to be able to read these texts. So I thought, what is the quickest way I can get people to read these texts, even not with 100% understanding, but just to get their feet wet so that they stay motivated as adult learners. And I've done an analysis of which are the most common words used by these authors. What is the grammar that you absolutely need in order to get started? You can always pick up another like obscure grammar feature later while reading them. And I've tried to like really condense it. I get the impression that a lot of Latin textbook authors are really grammar freaks, grammar nerds, and they try to teach you all the grammar they can possibly find in Latin. With all these silly little texts that you couldn't care less about. And I really wanted to reduce that and really do like a fast track, 25 lessons, like 25 hours, which doesn't mean like 25 hours of study. Obviously there's homework and stuff, but 25 in-person sessions. And then you're ready to dive into original literature and whatever else you need to learn and whatever else you need to know in terms of vocabulary or grammar, you can learn it just by reading the original.
Yeah, and if you are interested in doing any of these classes with Judith, you can reach out to her independently from this, because I know that I do see from time to time that she advertises groups starting for Latin and potentially other languages too, if I'm not mistaken, but Latin for sure. And so it's probably a wise idea to follow Judith on social media, and we'll pop links into the description of this video so that you can find her more easily and be connected that way. And just to change tack slightly, let's take Latin and move it to French. Suzanne had a question about French. How did you learn French? French also has very irregular spelling, and the way of pronouncing some words can be quite difficult for sure. How did you learn the French numbers as well?
Well, it's I started out on a bad foot with French because I had it at school, and our teacher was supposed to teach us in 2 years what the other classes had learned in 4. And instead, he didn't even teach us as much as they had learned in 2 years. He was always getting distracted, talking about his son who had dancing lessons with some of the girls in our class. And I mean, the pupils were also exploiting it, you know, just telling him, oh, what happened then? Did you hear about that? Or talking about mentioning a topic from French history, because he was also a history teacher. So it was very easy to get him to talk about anything other than French. So I was very frustrated with my French, and I didn't want to have anything to do with this language. But I hadn't counted on some of the friends that I had online from Quebec, and we were on this was before Zoom. It was on a messenger called Pal Talk, and there were these groups meeting in the afternoons and weekends and just chatting away, and sometimes doing karaoke and crosswords and stuff. And I asked them, after my French classes had failed, I asked them not to speak French to me, but one of them was a French guy, the others were from Quebec. Of course, they would also speak French among each other. So they didn't allow me to forget this language. This lasted for about 3 years. So I'd learned French until 10th grade. And when I graduated from 13th grade in Germany and was getting ready to go to university, I got invited to Quebec to stay with one of these friends and for a month. And I really discovered my love for Quebec and Quebecois French. I really like the accent. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I think it's so cute. And it sounds more down to earth, I don't know, it connects with me. Maybe also because I have good memories of it. So I became this Quebec freak, and I had to study French at university because I missed the deadline to enroll in linguistic study of English, I guess. I had to go for Romanistic, and so throughout university, pursuing a degree in French literature and French linguistics, I always tried to make it about Quebec. Whenever we had an assignment to dissect a movie or a book or something happening in, I would always pick some non-French author or some non-French event. Okay, at one point I also picked Albert Camus from Algeria, of course, but yeah, that was my way of rebelling against French.
I love it. I love it. I mean, it's a very interesting story. Now that you say that, I remember my first recollections of you on the online forums was actually, I associated you a lot with Canada. And now it comes back to me why I must have done that. I must have read things.
My teacher actually called me La Québécoise.
That's brilliant. So I've got one final question for you, and this is from Chanel. And Chanel asks if you've got any plans to study any lesser known languages, like Greenlandic or Basque.
Well, right now I don't have this plan. I mean, one could argue that learning Serbo-Croatian is like a comparatively small language, but it's not really. And same goes for the other languages that I've studied so far. They always had a few million speakers at least. Even Esperanto, a lot of people don't know it, but Esperanto probably has around 3 million speakers. That's as many people learned it as on Duolingo. And I think for me to study lesser known languages, I would love to, just because I'm fascinated by the differences in how languages work, how grammars work, and so on. But I think at this point, I'm also realistic enough to need some kind of prospect of using the language, even just once. If I was able to come to the Polyglot conference in Mexico, I would definitely be enrolling in this Nahuatl program that you organized. That would have been a dream to learn some Nahuatl and then go out into the market and actually speak it. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm not able to travel to Mexico. So I have to wait for one of these opportunities to go to the country, and then I will be learning one of the smaller languages as well.
That's a beautiful answer to end. I think, this is why I think a lot of us in for learning languages is to communicate with people and to reach out and to make those connections. And I think it's, even though you're a self-confessed introvert, right? And you're also a bookie, but that doesn't stop you wanting that connection. And that's something, actually, listening to you speak now, these things are not so black and white of introvert, extrovert. Introverts like just read and stay in silence, and extroverts, people often simplify this and boil it down to these very base and core things that they think are true. But as we've heard from you, it's not, it's an individual thing. And
no, well, first thing, it's introversion, extroversion is a scale. So I'm probably not at the deep end of it. But also, for me, it really makes a difference whether someone is speaking a foreign language. For example, if I see some people standing on the street here in Berlin, and they look lost, and they look German, I will probably be too introverted to approach them. But if they happen to be speaking Italian or Greek, oh my God, even if they don't look lost, I look at whether they might possibly be needing any help just to have an excuse to talk to them.
I love it. I love it. It's kind of like you almost see it as a golden opportunity. I love it, Judith. I love it. This is actually really true of you. Whenever I spent time with you and you've heard people, you're very open and happy to help people whenever you can. You're extremely approachable, and yeah, I mean, this is why we've become friends over the years, because you're just a delight to be around, and extremely.
Thank you. I get the same vibe from you, even more so. You always make people feel so good to be around.
I mean, I think maybe we both appreciate each other, and that's a good thing. And you know, I look forward to the next time we get to catch up in person. And thank you so much for today, for your time during this Q&A session. I will just refresh the room now, ready for the next session. But that just leaves me to say thank you once again, Judith, for joining us. Thank you for all of your insights, your stories, your motivation, your encouragement, and all the work you've done to help us all on the road to learn languages better.
Thank you so much.